Boston, the winningest sports city this century. Each championship deriving from a plan. Join us as we discuss the next Boston Banner Blueprint with your hosts, Josh Finkel, Nick Walsh, and Nate Philbrook.
Everybody, Boston Banner Blueprint back at you, episode 4. We're talking Patriots. But before we do that, Nate, take it away with a quick message.
Absolutely. Always want to plug the socials and let everybody know exactly where we're at. So go ahead and follow us, like, subscribe on X, Boston Banner BP, Instagram and Facebook, Boston Banner Blueprint, Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Go like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, share with your family, share with the next door neighbor. Get the message out, keep expanding this platform for us, and get involved in the conversations. We always love when people do that. So without further ado, let's kick it off and go back to you, Fink.
Yeah, so we're looking to talk some more Pats today. Kind of a slow news week in that department, but obviously Mike Vrabel, our new head coach, we have some openings on the coaching staff and some moves have been made. We've hired some coaches. And then I think, Nate, you want to talk some receivers we could potentially trade for. A little hint at that. But I'm going to kick it to you, Nick. I think it's your turn. You're a Pats guy, so let's talk.
Okay, so last time we talked Pats was our emergency episode podcast, the day that Vrabel's hire was announced, but we hadn't talked since the press conference. And how did you guys feel that press conference went? Did you come off well? Were you feeling excited, upbeat? Were you feeling more discouraged from the press conference? How are you guys feeling?
Fink, why don't you go ahead first?
I felt fired up. I don't know about you guys, but I was ready to strap on some pads and go play football for Mike Vrabel because he answered all the questions the way I think you would want your head coach to answer the questions. Like, he's pretty much said it's a clean sheet. Like, everyone's battling for a spot, no matter who you are. Entitlement's gone. Like, you're working for everything. I was fired up. I mean, feels like a complete 180 from what you felt last year with Mayo. I never felt that way with Mayo. Like, he didn't fire me up like Mike Vrabel fired me up in a 45-minute press conference. But I don't know how Nate felt, but that's personally how I felt. So, Nate, how'd you feel?
Yeah, I think encouraged is the word that I would use, because if you look back at our previous episodes and our previous takes of exactly what we felt as though was the right direction for the Patriots, is we needed a leader of men. And I don't think that you can come out of that press conference and know exactly that is what Mike Vrabel brings to the table. And so he commanded a presence. He answered every question honestly, but it was clear that his media skills are on another level than what Gerard Mayo's was. And, I think that encouraged is the right word, because as you mentioned, Fink, there's a lot of work to be done, and he didn't try and skate around that. He didn't try and make it a prettier picture than it is, but it's going to be a hard-nosed physical football team. And I think it started with the press conference. So I was super encouraged. What about you, Nick?
To echo everything that you guys said, I think the biggest thing for me, encourage is a good way to put it, but to me, it was just a sigh of a deep breath. Like, finally, we have something to look forward to. Finally, it felt like there's a direction again. There's stability again. It's just an adult in the building leading these guys. And I'm not saying Mayo was a child or anything like that, but he was definitely inexperienced and definitely not ready for the job it entailed. And I think that showed, and it was a complete contrast with Vrabel. And what really, the one portion of the press conference that really got to me that I loved was he was setting the bar high, but he was keeping it realistic at the same time, where the part that got to me was just be good enough to take advantage of bad football. Like, I think that is a realistic, reasonable goal moving forward for this upcoming 2025 season, knowing where the roster is right now. And you're going to take a lot of work and overhaul to be Super Bowl contenders again, obviously, but can we just take advantage of other teams' mistakes? Like, be pesky enough to just hang around, and if team makes a boneheaded decision, can you take advantage of it? And I think with Vrabel, the way he is with situational football and understanding the game and all the experience that he can draw from, I think we can get to that point.
Yeah, and I think that you hit the nail on the head on really two different fronts there. I think direction is a great word to use too. Again, his presence made you feel as though I'm a man with a plan and I'm going to execute that. One might even call that plan a blueprint. Were you going to comment on that, Fink? There we go. Picking up where you're putting down. So one might even call that plan a blueprint of what the offseason is going to look like leading into the 2025 season. And I actually believe that he even called it a blueprint on the podium for those that were listening.
Yeah.
Tony, we'll put that clip in. Producer Tony, can you cut to that clip? Thank you. All right, back to you, Nate.
So not only did he inspire direction, but also I think his football acumen with the in-game strategy is, again, something that was really lacking last year. We talked about that on our last pod of Gerard wasn't good at making those in-game adjustments. And to your point, Nick, knowing the rules better than his opponent. And that's where I think that Vrabel takes a massive step up of, we know that Drake May has the physical tools. And I think we'll get into this in a little bit of what his plan is for Drake May. But he talked about situational football over and over and over again. And that's something that Bill was really, really good at executing on. Of, you knew that the team was going to be prepared from an X's and O's standpoint. Execution is completely point aside, but being able to understand the game, understand what situation and how to put yourself in position for success is going to do light years for this young team.
Yeah. And to go off that, you mentioned Drake May, and one thing I love about the Vrabel hire, it goes back to, I don't know if you guys ever watched, there's so many documentaries now about the Patriots dynasty, but the Man in the Arena one with Brady, the one that he produced, it was actually, I think it was actually the episode Vrabel guest starred on, but Brady was talking about all these young young quarterbacks coming into the league, and Brady, now 40 something years old, looks at them and be like, yeah, he has a lot of talent, but who's going to teach him? He had Bill to teach him and provide stability. We saw what Drake May could do this year without having a stable coaching front, without a stable roster, and without a stable teacher. And Vrabel comes from a background ever since his childhood. His two parents were teachers. He's a teacher at heart. So we talked about how Ben Johnson was potentially a head coaching candidate for this team and being the offensive mind, and maybe that's the direction you need with a young quarterback. I think Vrabel, yeah, he doesn't have the offensive background, but I think he checks every other box to provide May with a solid floor going forward and to keep growing.
No, I agree. You go, Nate. You go.
I was going to say that the network that Vrabel has within the football realm is so much more vast than what Gerard Mayo was able to bring to the table. And so I think that's another reason that it's cause for some optimism or encouragement or whatever word you want to throw in there, that I think that putting yourself in position for success and fail fast with Mayo and making that quick hook of getting him out the door, again, just puts you in position ahead of free agency, ahead of the draft prep, ahead of all of this before the playoffs really even began. And it puts your team in a position of having that direction of what this offseason blueprint is going to look like.
Now, I got a question I've been wanting to ask you guys ever since Saturday night. Did you guys, I'm assuming you guys watched divisional weekend. Did you watch every single game?
Yep.
So the question I have for you, roughly a little over a year ago, 13 months ago, go back to Christmas Eve of 2023. Are we going to look back in 20 years that Chad Ryland is our Mo Lewis? Is he going to be the one that screwed over our franchise for 20 plus years, like Mo Lewis did the rest of the NFL?
No.
Nate, do you understand where I'm going with this?
Because we did not get Jaden Daniels. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Watching Jaden Daniels this weekend, watching him this whole year, like, dude's impressive. And really, how far did we end up falling as an organization from the dynasty to, wow, the Washington Commanders are the model of how we want to rebuild? Like, last year, they lost just as many games as we did, and they cleared house. They brought in a brand new whole front office, whole new coach, coordinators, young quarterback. They went out and signed 13 starters, and all of a sudden they're in the NFC Championship game, and their rookie quarterback is rushing for the most yards in the history of a rookie quarterback. Like, how many dramatic come from behind games has this Washington Commanders team won this year? And to tie it back into the Patriots, why can't that be us next year? Why not? Why can't we model our offseason blueprint over how they did last year? Go out, sign a whole bunch of, not, I want to say star power starters, like, but can you get it quality NFL players in the building, build a culture, and start just winning some football games, get in the hunt, and who knows what can happen.
I think we're in a little bit of a different spot because the Commanders had not necessarily more of a blueprint, but they just had more. They had more talent. I would say they have more talent on the defensive side. They have Terry McLaurin on offense. They have a good running back, pretty solid offensive line. So they had a decent amount to work with, a lot more than we have, I think. And also, Jaden Daniels is 24 and Drake May is 22. So I don't think, like, I'm all good with Drake May. When he's 24 and doing what Jaden Daniels is doing, we'll be fine. But not taking anything away from Jaden Daniels, but he's still kind of old. So, but to answer your question, it is possible. I mean, we kind of think of the NFL recently. We kind of see teams kind of go through like a quick lull, and then they're quickly back into contention. Like the Steelers, they started the season super hot with a quick QB change. Obviously, they died out, but you can see how like little moves and changes here and there can make a team better. And I think we're in a great position with Vrabel to do that. So I would say the answer is yes, but the Commanders had a little bit of an easier path.
Yeah, and to your point, I think that Jaden Daniels, not only is he 2 years older, he had 55 career starts in college, whereas Drake May had 24, I think.
26. Yeah.
And so, yeah, just he was coming out a more polished prospect. That wasn't unexpected. And so I'm happy for the Commanders Nation because them as an organization and them as a fan base have gone through hell and back with
they deserve it. They deserve
ownership group and just years and years of mediocrity. And then watching other teams in their division like have the ebbs and swings where they were just continually in the cellar. And so, I think that, to your point, though, I do think that it is a good blueprint of what can be. And so if you look at some of the key additions that they made, is Austin Eckler of today even better than Antonio Gibson, a healthy Antonio Gibson in a proper running scheme last year or next year?
They're probably not. Gibson and Eckler are probably pretty similar, especially with Daniels back there. It's probably
is
similar.
Brian Robinson better than Ramondre Stevenson at this point from an explosive standpoint, from a pass catching standpoint? But I do think the biggest difference is a Terry McLaurin type. And so we're going to talk about some wide receivers later on in this episode. But another key addition was Bobby Wagner and that linebacker on the mic. And so if you get a Juwan Bentley back or you go and you sign a guy that's going to anchor that defense from the linebacker position, I think that is going to be incredibly key. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't see any reason why this can't be a blueprint for what the Patriots can be next offseason. They have to go out and they have to execute this offseason to be able to put the players on the field that are going to accelerate this process, because right now, as it stands, it's not going to be pretty, but there's lots of room, obviously, that we're far from a finished product. So we haven't even really gotten started, actually. So just the head coach, I guess, is in place, and our special teams coordinator. So
yeah. And to answer, I know I was the one to set up the question, but to answer my own question, I agree with you, Nate, 100%, and Fink, the age difference between Daniels and May. Like, it's no surprise. It shouldn't have been a surprise that the two rookie quarterbacks that showed the most success this year were the two rookie quarterbacks that had the most college experience, with Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels. So,
and they both had two pretty good head coaches. Dan Quinn's a good head coach, been to a Super Bowl, and Sean Payton's a pretty good head coach too. So, and I think coaching definitely matters. So, back to you.
Yeah, and the one thing that you didn't mention about the Commanders last season, the additions they brought in, Cliff Kingsbury as an OC, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was at least two, if not three, offensive lineman starters. And we know how our offensive line was this year. Going back to our first Patriots episode, everyone knows how much I implore that the fat men are the ones that win the football games. So bring me all the fat men to be on the line of scrimmage for the Patriots this offseason. If it's Ronnie Stanley, if it's Calvin Banks Jr., if it's Will Campbell, I don't care. Bring me the fat guys to protect Drake May.
Yeah, and he did mention that in his press conference, that was priority number one, is protecting the quarterback. He knows the asset that he has, and that was one of the key assets that brought him to New England, that made this job so attractive, is they have quarterback figured out. And so it's kind of like that meme of, it's the quarterback standing upright with a fat guy in front of him throwing to who knows what, versus the quarterback on his back throwing to a star receiver that the ball doesn't even get there. And so hopefully everybody knows what I'm talking about
I know exactly what you're talking about.
But
I know what you're talking about.
And I think that when we're talking about another thing that he actually talked about during that press conference was the continuity in college programs, because of NIL and because of the transfer portal, a lot of these guys don't get some sort of consistency in their training, some sort of consistency in their maturity process, and some really have a sense of entitlement coming out of school because they've already been making a lot of money, some of these top prospects. And so that's where one thing that I think Will Campbell is really attractive. He's a 3-year starter at LSU. His mindset and Vrabel's mindset are very, very similar. And so I think that I know that we've mentioned him here in the past, but whether it's at 4 or whether it's, a trade down and grab him later, I think Will Campbell fits the DNA and fits the blueprint perfectly in terms of what they're looking to build around. And obviously protecting Drake May is priority number one.
And Finkel, you kind of hinted at earlier that additions to the staff have already been made, and we touched on Vrabel's situational football awareness. I think we're going to get a lot more of that, because one of the additions that were already made this week that was announced was here in New England with Bill Belichick for the last 20 years. We all know who Ernie Adams is. Mike Vrabel brought over his Ernie Adams this week in John Stretcher. I'm mispronouncing the name, but he was with.
They call him Stretch. They call him Stretch.
Stretch. He was with Vrabel in Tennessee. He was his quote unquote game manager. He was the one in his headset during situational, making the situational decisions and everything like that, helping Vrabel in key moments. Exactly what Ernie Adams did for Bill for all those years. So I think that once I saw that name and knew the connection, I love the hire.
And coming from the McVay tree now.
Yeah.
True. Spending the last year or two in LA.
Which that guy just seems to pump out coaching tree prospects of
Exactly.
McVay is a guy that you want your name connected to.
Oh yeah.
Basically like Shanahan to this day. And I'm not talking about the 28-3 Shanahan. I'm talking about his old man. Just want to point that out there.
And then another guy they retained was the special teams coordinator, Jeremy Springer. I think that's his name. No, Nate got that name for me earlier, but they had the number 2 unit in the NFL. I forget who put that out there, what stat thing it was, but that's definitely a big. If you want to talk blueprint, definitely a guy you want to keep, because we've seen, 2 years ago how bad our special teams was, and this year it was definitely much better. It felt like. So that's definitely a guy you need for a blueprint like that, and it's good that
really
in
a 1-year turnaround too.
Yeah. And then some guys that left, the Bengals, they must have liked, going back to what Nick was saying about our offensive line, they must have liked our offensive line, because they took our O-line coach and the assistant. So I don't know what they liked, but they saw week 1 and they loved it.
Yeah, that's Scott Peters and Michael McCarthy, for those keeping track at home. That was the Patriots offensive line and assistant offensive line coach from this year that were not retained, and then were just recently signed with the Bengals coaching staff.
And then I forget the other name, but they hired a strength coach too, another variable guy. I don't know if you guys saw that.
I can't think of the name,
you did. I'm sure you saw it.
Yeah,
but I forget the name. It's probably not great. We should know the name.
Nate, not Nate. Fink, you made me think of it when you mentioned the Cincinnati taking some of our offensive coaches. Do you guys find it maybe not weird, but more fascinating that as of 8:30 on Monday night, January 20th, that Alex Van Pelt is still employed by New England, that he hasn't been let go yet?
Well, did they officially say that Covington got let go?
No.
So, and he's taking interviews. So I think the assumption is that they're both gone. Because, Vrabel mentioned multiple times that they haven't really started OC interviews yet. So,
right. But
maybe they keep him around. Is that what
that's
you're saying? Yeah.
Right. Maybe
I would keep him around personally.
Yeah.
Maybe not as your OC, but.
Yeah. He seemed like he had a good rapport with May. So maybe not a passing game coordinator, but maybe a quarterbacks coach, and you have a bona fide offensive coordinator come in just to have some familiarity for Drake May.
Yeah, maybe I would like to keep him around.
Still here.
That's exactly what I would have said, just because of the relationship with May, and May loves the guy, and I don't know if you want to upset your rookie potential superstar quarterback, but so definitely a guy to keep around. And I think you hit a nail on the head. Quarterbacks coach seems like the perfect spot for him. You can kind of be more personable with the guy, have more of a relationship than you really can if you're the OC, something like that. So that's my thought.
I agree that I think quarterbacks coach would be a perfect spot for him. I just don't think he takes it. I think that would be a demotion. He was the quote unquote head coach of the offense this year. And I think that he did enough with not enough that he will get looks of either at least lateral move to another organization. But I do think that it is interesting that we haven't really heard one way or another on what direction they're leaning with him.
I haven't even seen any interview requests for him yet.
Yeah, me either. I know Covington got one also to the Bengals.
They can have him.
Yeah. They take him. Take him.
That I won't lock the door on the way out for him. I'll hold it wide open.
Any other candidates that you guys want to cover? I have a candidate that I think or a couple candidates that are rather interesting, but it's kind of married to one of my trade proposals that for a wideout that I'm looking to make.
I have a defensive coordinator name if you want that first.
Yeah,
There we
toss
go.
that.
I don't know if you guys read the Mike Reese article earlier in the week, but apparently in the article, he asked other people around the league, team officials, front office people, who's a defensive coordinator named to keep an eye on for the Patriots. And the common name was the current defensive line coach in Detroit, Terrell Williams. I didn't know much about him, but reading Reese's article, he was with Vrabel in Tennessee, and Vrabel's last year, he actually named Williams his assistant head coach. So there's a good close relationship there. Vrabel obviously trusts him enough to give him that assistant head coach title once. Is that a potential name that you guys would? I don't know if you. I'll be honest with you, I didn't know much about him until I read the article. So, but if at least looking at it in the sense of who Vrabel is going to be able to turn around and be able to hand the keys to the defense to and not have to worry, you got to have trust. And this Terrell Williams guy seems to have it with Vrabel in that past relationship.
I think that's a pretty good pull. And you said he's in Detroit, so coming from Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn, a guy who's getting head coaching looks and might get the Jets job, sign me up. I'd probably would have to look more into him, but just the kind of coaching resume he has, I would definitely be very interested in that. And two hard-nosed coaches like Dan Campbell and Vrabel, two guys you would want coaching your football team. We're big on leader of men. So learning from two guys like that, and to your point, Nick, he was assistant head coach, so the trust is definitely there. So yeah, sign me up for that. I would definitely be interested in that.
Yeah, and two, to have the background specifically on the defensive line, I think is pretty attractive, as that was a weakness of this unit. Additionally, you have to assume that with the interest that Aaron Glenn got last offseason, as well as entering this offseason as a head coaching candidate, that Dan Campbell and the rest of the front office and the Lions in Detroit had to have assumed that Aaron Glenn was likely going somewhere else. And so the thought process there would be that they would then prepare the next guy in line, right? And so if they're already prepping this guy, they kind of did the hard job, if you will, for us, and he's hopefully more primed to move into that more coveted role. And so I think that that's a pretty easy linear move that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. The only worry that I have is if Detroit pulls Cleveland with what was his name? Was it Quinn, the potential offensive coordinator that we could have interviewed, and they promoted him right to OC, so we couldn't interview him right away. So with Glenn getting head coaching interviews, if they're already preparing for him to be gone, is that something Detroit's already kind of agreed to behind the scenes? Like, hey, once he accepts the New York Jets job or the Saints job, you're our DC, we're promoting you from within. And then it blocks him coming to us.
And honestly, if that's the case, then that's the case. I mean, good for him for getting that next step up. I don't think that just with the lack of recognition of and our how plugged in we are to the different transactions and potential transactions, the fact that we have a relatively limited knowledge base on this guy kind of screams to me that he's not like the next coming of whoever you want to throw out there. And so, you know, I would just, I guess, be happy for him that, hey, good for you. You got the job that you wanted. And if that, we just move on to the next candidate there.
Yep.
So
who is
any other DC?
Who is the names? And that was the only DC name I brought to the table this week.
Yeah, so you mentioned the divisional round, and a couple of the names that were thrown out immediately after the Rams loss was Nick Caley, Ragione, and then one of Mike LaFleur, current offensive coordinator for the Rams, as a potential look for offensive coordinator with the Patriots. And so one thing that I think is really attractive there is, number one, yes, Mike LaFleur is brothers to Green Bay Packers head coach Matt LaFleur, who, if we all are remembering correctly, Mike Vrabel hired as his offensive coordinator in Tennessee before he was then promoted to the head coach of the Packers. And so there's a familial tie there, as well as obviously the McVay tree that we just talked about. And then there's obviously a lot of attractive features to that West Coast offense that the Rams run, and how that could marry to Drake May's play style. But I'm just going to throw out a dream scenario for me of watching that game yesterday was it's going to be a couple of days ago by the time people are listening to this, but watching the way that the Rams march down the field and then have that Mr. Reliable Cooper Kupp. And so if we get a Cooper Kupp with a Mike LaFleur in New England, sign me up. I want that Mr. Reliable for Drake May.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like Mike LaFleur. He was with the Jets, right, before he went to the Packers.
Well, he's with the Rams now.
I mean, yeah, he's with the Rams, but he came from the Jets, right? Wasn't he with? Am I dumb?
Yes. No, you're correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would like that.
21-22.
So you're saying we get Mike LaFleur and then trade for a Kupp?
Correct. Which, for anybody that's wondering, Cooper Kupp is currently 31 years old. He has 7 years of experience. He is not a free agent until after the 2026 season, with relatively, in today's wide receiver market, relatively low cap hits. So, I mean, it does go up to about 30 million, but 30 million for a veteran wide receiver that and you have plenty of cap space. Again, that's going to be a Julian Edelman to Brady type of release valve for him. That old Mr. Reliable, when it's 3rd and 4, that on that inseam, he's going to be able to continually catch the ball and move the sticks. And so that's where I think that it makes a lot of sense, or is a pretty attractive outside option. Everybody keeps talking about T. Higgins, and I just want to throw some other names out there that are possibilities, because the Rams at some point are going to have to look at Puka Nacua as their number one and see what else they have in that wide receiver room.
They do have a lot of depth at wide receiver. We saw it when Puka and Kupp were both out. They have a lot of guys. Do you think they would move Cooper Kupp?
Well, I mean, he's an aging veteran, right? If he's on the wrong side of 30.
Still pretty good, though.
He is still good, but I mean, to follow the mindset of you want to move on too early rather than too late, I'm willing to take that risk based off of the financial security that the Patriots have. Of you can have that veteran guy. You don't have that veteran guy in the wide receiver room to be able to lead these young men. And so you have a guy that's 30. He has 7 years of experience. Yes, he has 2 ACL surgeries, but also when he's healthy, his route running is unmatched, and he just knows how to get open. And so, he has a catch radius that's bigger than he is. And so that would help with a guy like Drake May.
Yeah, no, I'm a big Cooper Kupp guy. Wasn't great for me for fantasy this year, but still a big Cooper Kupp guy.
So to answer the original question, Kaylee or LaFleur, I think you can't go wrong either way. I like both candidates, but for the wide receiver portion of it, there's another name that I'm potentially like more than Cooper Kupp, who is potentially available via trade this offseason. DK Metcalf. That's my white whale of the offseason. If you get DK Metcalf, I want offensive line help too, and I want a whole bunch of starters on defense and all that, but DK Metcalf is an A+ offseason for me right from the get-go. Everything else is a cherry on top.
I agree, and I definitely I feel like DK's been potentially going to get moved the last like 2 or 3 off seasons. I feel like it has to be coming, especially with Ninjigba's emergence. I think and Tyler Lockett seems like he's never ever going to age, so you always got Tyler Lockett. I definitely think DK's getting moved, and you definitely have the ability to make a move like that.
Well, and this goes back to what we saw with T. Higgins and the Bengals last year. Of DK Metcalf is going into the final year of his contract. He's set to make $18 million in base salary with a $30 million cap hit, but he's only entering his 28th season, so he's still on the youthful side, but he's clearly a veteran with 5 years of experience. And so DK is also the white whale. I misspoke when we were talking about Tyreek Hill. What I like Tyreek Hill, I'm still of the camp very much yes, but DK, Mr. Gummy Bear, the king of gummy bears is the guy that I think just brings that swag to New England, that consistent deep ball threat, but also he's a guy that's going to run a slant over the middle, get blown up one play, and then take it to the house the next. And so DK would be a lot of fun. I think, depending on, just because of age and the years remaining, I can't imagine that it would be too dissimilar from a Cup, from a structural standpoint of what that trade would look like. You have to think it's a day 2 or 3 pick to get either of those guys, right?
Yeah. Well, the potential framework might have already been leaked this past week too. There was a report going around Twitter that it was in the sense of coming from a LA Chargers viewpoint, where the Chargers would have to give up their 2025 third and fourth round pick for DK Metcalf. And I know we know this, but some of our listeners might. There's like a universal draft trade chart that gives value, different number of values to each draft pick in each round, that GMs have come out on record to say, yes, they use these value charts to, if you ever wonder why a team thinks, oh, trading a second round pick is the same as trading a future third and fourth round pick, equals up in value. So I went and pulled that trade chart when I saw that report, not to get too Einstein math equation for you, but that third and fourth round pick for the Chargers would equal 208 value points. For the Patriots to match that, all they would have to offer is their second round pick. I take that back. Their third round pick, number 77, which, if people remember, is the one we got from Atlanta for the Matthew Judon trade. So the worst of our third round picks plus a seventh round pick, that would equal that Chargers value for that framework. Now, I'm in the camp of it's going to take a hell of a lot more than that. Maybe not. I'm not talking like first round pick. I'm talking maybe a second round pick. I think it's going to take more than a high third and seventh to get him. I think it'd probably be like a second and a fourth. So, which I agree. Which I still would do in a heartbeat for DK Metcalf. But if we're just going off of the draft value chart, it would be pick 77 in a seventh round pick, potentially, if that Chargers report has any basis in reality, which I'm still skeptical of. But it gives us a framework to start off.
And I know that we discussed this in our personal chat here throughout the week, but using the proposed or leaked trade value for what T. Higgins was this time last offseason is not the necessarily framework that I want to operate on, is because that deal didn't get done. And so that's why I think that it's going to be less than the proposed end of the first, beginning of the second round pick that the Bengals wanted for T. Higgins, because in my opinion, DK is just as explosive and he's a clear alpha on his own team, whereas T is not. And so, and I've been pretty direct about me questioning T's relevance with the New England Patriots, but I think that DK is a pretty special talent, and it's a guy that obviously we passed up on in the draft. That I wish, hindsight being 2020, I wish we could go back and tell somebody to pick completely differently, but they don't listen to us yet, surprisingly enough. So
I think Mike Vrabel does. Mike Vrabel does. He mentioned us
dropping blueprints and banners in the same damn conference. So no, I'm with you there. And one thing that just to kind of put a bow on this point is I think that I think the Bengals were asking for too much. And so I think if the Seahawks want to get realistic and they're not going to re-sign him, then they need to be able to offer or accept a package rather that is likely to get the job done. And that 3rd and 7th, sign me up. If it is some sort of second and cash or something like that, then I'm just as happy to do that. I think that DK is a difference maker, and he's one that I want on the team, and I want on the team for a while.
I agree. What about AJ Brown?
AJ Brown's a guy I'd probably be willing to get a little crazy for. If they wanted to offer up next year's first for AJ Brown, I'd be okay with that.
Me too. Take all of next year's picks for AJ Brown and then trade for DK, and now we're talking. A plus offseason.
So the AJ Brown to New England, obviously with the natural relationship there with Vrabel, is everybody's like, oh well, they had a strained relationship, and that's why AJ Brown got shipped out. No, they didn't. Vrabel was in the camp of wanting to keep him in Tennessee and pay him the money that he was worth. And that's ultimately what strained the relationship between Vrabel and the GM. And so I think that, and rumor has it too, that AJ Brown was crying on draft night when the Patriots did not pick him. And so we know that he has a special affinity for New England. And I just can't even imagine what Drake May and AJ Brown could do together. I mean, he's a special talent. And so obviously when you get one of those top guys in the league that is on your team, sign me up. But I think that he's a guy that I'm willing to get a little crazy for sure.
Okay, so AJ Brown in a vacuum, sign me up 100%. What worries me is, did any of you guys hear what he said after the game on Sunday for the Eagles? After the Eagles game?
We should tell our listeners.
Please tell me.
Well, he had 2 catches for 20 yards or roughly.
Exactly why I'm saying AJ Brown. He doesn't want to be there. Come to New England.
But the reporter asked him what was going on, and he says, I hate the snow. I would not wish that on my worst enemy of playing a game in the snow.
All right. Good thing we don't play too many snow games.
You're in New England. It doesn't have to be snow. It's going to be freezing cold in December, where you're going to need them the most. If you get where we want to get to, you're going to have to win January games in the cold, and that could potentially mean snow. So if he's already out on
$35 million a year can make you pretty warm.
And I mean, just look at the concept too, right? That the Eagles won on the back of yesterday on the back of Saquon Barkley and AJ Brown's ability to block on the outside, which is going to be a positive in a Vrabel-led team because Vrabel had Derrick Henry in Tennessee. And so AJ Brown's ability to block is also a plus in that offense. And I mean, they won yesterday with 200 yards rushing from Saquon and only 128 passing yards. And so that's not necessarily going to be the case in New England because he's going to be a featured asset. And so I think that the statistics is probably not, that stat line at least does not cause me for concern. And I mean, whether it's in New England or they go and they play indoors and wherever, that doesn't bother me. It's football.
Yeah. It just puts a little bit of a red flag up in the air for me in the back of my mind. But again, push come to shove, I'm still trading for him. If that move is on the table, yeah, AJ Brown is a bona fide stud of a wide receiver. So absolutely. There's a little bit of a red flag there. I'm not gonna lie. I'd be like, yeah.
Yeah, but if you're not a Patriot and you had to play in the snow, you would say the same thing probably.
Not like it's not cold in Philly too, but I mean,
yeah, you would know, Walsh. You lived there or lived there.
You're giving away my secret to all the New England fans that are listening to this, that I had to deal with Eagle fans for 6 years.
So that's now 4 wide receivers and top wide receiver talents that we've mentioned between AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Tyreek Hill, and Cooper Kupp. Where do you guys, taking compensation that it would take to ultimately sign or trade for one of these players, where do you guys lean? What direction do you feel as though is best for kickstarting this offseason Patriots banner blueprint?
DK,
For
100%.
for
I don't
me,
even have to think twice.
I agree. It's either DK or AJ Brown for me. I want the youth. If you want to set a blueprint, you want someone on the younger side, but also that has done it. And both DK and AJ Brown are younger than Cooper Creek, and they've both done it. So that's just where I go. But AJ Brown, if it's available, that's my white whale. I like DK, but AJ Brown, man, different world.
Yeah, and DK is about 5 months younger than AJ Brown, so not a difference there. But I'm with you guys that I would err on the side of youth, and so I think that DK is going to be cheaper than AJ Brown, and obviously the only 1 year of control. Unlike our conversation about Vladdy last episode coming to the Red Sox without an extension, I do think that in the football world, you trade for DK with the expectation that you're going to sign him to an extension. And so having that, having that weapon and then being able to continue to use your assets from a draft level perspective, whether it's your first round pick, your second round pick, and then be able to trade those other assets for a prominent outside receiver is the path that I'd ultimately take as well.
And in the NFL, unlike the MLB, if we traded for DK Metcalf and you can't get an extension done right away, there is one tool that the Patriots would have that the Red Sox wouldn't in the case with Vladdy, and that's franchise tag. Right. Tag him. And he's not going anywhere. You get him for the average AAV of the top 5 highest paid wide receivers, which DK Metcalf to me in my mind is a top 5 wide receiver anyway. So who cares?
It's not like we don't have the money, and our motto is spend all the money. So
facts.
Definitely have the financial capital to do that. I don't know if that's the right word. Nate's the money guy. Is that the right word?
100%. Nailed it.
Appreciate that. You see that? I'm learning.
So in a relatively slow news week, we've still taken a good 45 minutes. You guys have any other Pat's talks that you wanna cover on this episode?
Only other thing that is probably like newsworthy-ish is there was one more hire this afternoon to the Patriots staff, and we talked about Joe McDonald with the Red Sox, but the Patriots actually stole a Red Sox front office guy in Joe McDonald. So do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Again, he's coming into a strategy role, and so I'm all for the big brain guys as long as it's not necessarily impacting real football decisions because the numbers say to do one thing. That's where I think that Vrabel's experience really will play an important factor of differentiating that big brain numbers say one thing versus the ability to make sound football decisions. Fink, what about you?
Yeah, I don't know too much about the guy. Sounds great. Happy for him. Happy to have him come over here, but that's all I got for you.
You really dug deep into your preparation, Fink, for this episode. I just want to, on behalf of all our fans, I really want to say thank you and appreciate that.
Well,
no problem.
Well, what I found interesting with the Joe McDonald thing was Vrabel's coming from last year being with the Cleveland Browns, and the Cleveland Browns were the team 4 or 5 years ago, I want to say, that really dove deep into analytics and kind of pulled a similar move, and they signed away I'm blanking on the guy's actual real name, but he was the Jonah Hill character in the movie Moneyball. He was Pete in Moneyball. His real name's not Pete, and I'm blanking on the guy's name. But the Browns pulled that same move and basically hired Jonah Hill, or Jonah Hill's character, I should say. So Vrabel was spending a year like that getting knowledge of how analytics can drive football preparation. And he goes out and basically hires the senior analytics guy from the Red Sox in their own backyard. So that's kind of why I kind of like the move, in the sense where Vrabel's pulling from his past experience and maybe he picked up something there.
Paul DePodesta.
Thank you for pulling that name.
Sounds like Paul the podcast. Paul the podcast, Boston Banner Blueprint.
But there was also one more hire that came like 30 minutes after the press conference, and that was Ryan Callen. Is that his last name? He was with Vrabel in Tennessee and hired him out from the Jets. So that's going to be an interesting power dynamic where Elliott Wolf is still, quote unquote, the guy in charge, and Vrabel's getting his right-hand man in the front office. So it's like, who's going to be making the – I think we can all agree that Vrabel's going to be the one making the final decision. But which
he was very non-committal on that. He was very non-committal on that question in the press conference.
He was, but all the reports that came out afterwards that, like, was it Schefter that came out into that? I think the exact quote was, Vrabel's the man. Like, Vrabel's going to be the one getting the final say, push come to shove. Now it might be Elliott Wolf or Ryan Callen driving the road to what decision is going to be made, but Vrabel's still going to be the one making that final say. He's going to be the one giving the stamp of approval, or he's going to be the one vetoing it and going back to the drawing board. But it's just going to be like that first time where there's going to be a disagreement on an evaluation of a player. Vrabel and Callen want this guy, and Elliott Wolf wants another guy. And someone's going to have to be right. Someone's going to have to be wrong. And we've already seen Elliott Wolf throw his coaching staff under the bus like he did this year, which he probably is right looking at the coaching staff. But it's like, that's setting up, I think, a potential source of dysfunction potentially down the line.
Yeah, and I think it's an important kind of caveat to that, as Vrabel did mention many times in his presser his already relationship with Elliott Wolf and how their communication has really kicked off in a good way and an important way. And so he also mentioned his relationship to the GM and to ownership being a really important facet to the job, as obviously that was his oust of Tennessee, and he doesn't want that if he's going to be building a program from more or less the ground up here in New England. And so having final say and having your guys in your corner is really important. And I mean, I don't necessarily know where I heard it. I think it was on the Catch 22 podcast with Lazar and Barth. But at the end of the day, Elliott Wolf is a scout. He loves to be the pro scout side of things, and that's where his heart lies. And so I think bringing in a guy that has the experience of Callen to be able to balance that room out and allow people to really play to their strengths. Again, if we're putting people in position for success, then success will follow. Of putting people where they belong is going to be really, really important.
I agree. I actually agree with that last part. You always have to put people where to. I just botched that. Never mind, but I agree with what you said. And I agree that it could be maybe down the line a weird dynamic, but something I'm not too worried about. If, like I said, I think on the emergency podcast, like what Vrabel wants should go, and if he is okay with this, then I'm okay with it because he's the leader of our football team, so I'm good with it for now. Obviously, takes can change, like so if it goes bad, I'll be like, oh yeah, it sucks, but for now, I'm good with it. We'll see how the draft goes and free agency.
So, Nick, you really just brought us up to speed on all things hire-wise from end of the season until now. And so, any other takes anybody wants to get off their chest before we end recording?
I mean, I think I come in pretty hot and heavy on Kraft the last couple of weeks in terms of
we know how you like to get hot and heavy.
Oh my God, we're going to start with this again, but in terms of like really going after Kraft, I actually have nothing on this week. Like I think I got all my anger out and this Vrabel news is basically like a turning point and being able to look ahead and actually for the first time in 2 years feel some optimism.
Fair. Finkel?
I'm encouraged, like you opened the podcast with, Nate. Very encouraged. I think we're putting a blueprint together. I like the hires so far. I like the backgrounds that they have. I like how they all have done something before. It's not just like last year we're just kind of putting guys where they don't really belong and they're not on the best path to success, like you just said. So I'm encouraged and I'm excited and I'm ready to release Boston Banner Blueprint Mock Draft 1.0 at some point soon.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that a name that we actually did not mention once this podcast, and I kind of want to just circle it real quick, is the Josh McDaniels. Everybody had assumed he was the heir apparent to the offensive coordinator position.
And he still might be.
And he still might be. If I were a betting guy, I would say he'd probably be my betting favorite, but I've lost a lot of money betting. So certainly don't pay attention to my bets. However, I think that it is worth noting that sure, there's a lot of pluses that we discussed about Josh McDaniels. We discussed that on the last emergency podcast. But I think that some of the other offensive names that we brought up are really intriguing, and this is a very, very important hire for the direction of this football team and the growth of Drake May. And so, to your point, Nick, I just hope they get it right. We won't know that they will get it right immediately, but I just hope they get it right. And so this can really either accelerate or decelerate this growth and maturation process.
And at that point, it's just basically a waiting game to be able to evaluate on how well they did in that regard.
Yeah, but I
think
mean,
that
it's a pretty low bar. You got to just last more than 1 year.
That is true.
Really not hard to beat. So
I think we kind of hit everything that I think we set out to on this Patriots episode. Fink, do you want to let the listeners know what's coming next week?
Yeah, our first Celtics banner blueprint talk. We haven't talked Celtics yet. There's some news coming, potential sale, I believe. Nick's been talking about that. So we're going to talk some Celtics, I believe, next week, next Monday. We record Monday nights, comes out Tuesday when producer Tony has some free time. So that is what's on the agenda.
Yeah, and we're also deep in discussions to expand to 2 times a week as well. Start producing some more content for folks as more news is coming out and just get on the airways a lot more.
And some more potential bonus pods. Well, we don't have any yet besides an emergency pod, but some bonus pods coming out soon too. Not soon, but they're on the docket. They're definitely being talked about. So do it for the people here at Boston Banner Blueprint. Boston Streakers merch is in the works as well. We're working on that. So that's going to be awesome. We'll let you know when that drops, but that's all for me for right now.
Yeah, and before we go, make sure you smash that like button, follow button, like us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. On Twitter, it's Boston Banner BP, Instagram, Boston Banner Blueprint, as well as on Facebook, Boston Banner Blueprint, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Like, comment, follow. Rate us 5 stars, as I know that is the saying in the industry, and we are in the industry now. So rate us 5 stars, help get us to the top of the podcast ranks.
Share it with everybody you know. Share it. And
if you didn't understand a word that Nate just said, just look at the bottom of the screen. It's right there on the ticker.
And it's in all of our social bios. So if you find one of the accounts, just click the blue link and you'll be right there. That's it for this edition of the Boston Banner Blueprint. We'll catch you next time when we're talking Celtics. Peace.